Chapter 3. Ham came to a spot where boiling mud seemed to be welling up from below, and steamy plumes whirled up to lose themselves in the fog, evidence of the vast internal heat that warmed the planet. He stood staring at it, and suddenly a violent jerk on the cord nearly toppled him backward. He spun around. Patricia materialized abruptly out of the fog, one hand clutching a ropey plant. She dropped it as she saw him, and suddenly she was clinging frantically to him. "Ham!" she gasped. "Let's go back! I'm scared!" Scared? Of what? He knew her character. She was valiant to the point of recklessness against any danger she could understand, but let there be a hint of mystery in an occurrence, and her active imagination painted horrors beyond her ability to face. "I don't know," she panted. I saw things." "Where?" "In the fog, everywhere." Ham disengaged his arms and dropped his hands to the butts of the weapons in his belt. "What sort of things?" he asked. "Horrible things, nightmarish things." He shook her gently. "Who's timid now?" he asked, but kindly. The query had the effect he sought. She gripped herself and calmed. "I'm not frightened," she snapped. "I was startled. I saw—" She paled again. "Saw what?" "I don't know. Shapes in the mist. Great moving things with faces. Gargoyles, devils, nightmares." She shuddered, then calmed once more. "I was bending over a little pool out there, examining a biopod, and everything was quiet, sort of deadly quiet. And then a shadow passed in the pool, a reflection of something over me, and I looked up and saw nothing. But then I began to hear rustles and murmurs and noises like muffled voices, and I began to see the fog shapes, horrible shapes, all around me. And I screamed, and then I realized you couldn't hear a scream, so I jerked the rope. And then I guess I just closed my eyes and rushed through them to you." She shivered against him. "All around you?" he asked sharply. "Do you mean between you and me?" She nodded. "Everywhere." Ham laughed shortly. "You've had a daydream, Pat. The rope isn't long enough for anything to pass between us without coming so close to one of us that he couldn't see it clearly. And I saw nothing. Absolutely nothing." "Well, I saw something," she insisted, "and it wasn't imaginary. Do you think I'm just a nervous child, afraid of strange places? I was born on an alien planet." At his indulgent grin, she flared in indignation. "All right, let's both of us stand here perfectly quiet. Perhaps they'll come back again. Then we'll see what you think of them." He nodded agreement, and they stood silently under the translucent dome of mist. There was nothing but a deep and endless grayness, and an infinite silence, but a silence not like any Ham had ever experienced in his life. For on Venus, even in the sultriest part of the hotlands, there is always the rustle of teeming life and the eternal moaning of the underwind, while on Earth no day nor night is ever quite silent. There is always somewhere the sighing of leaves, or the rustle of grass, or the murmur of water, or the voices of insects, or even in the driest desert the whisper of sand as it warms or cools. But not here. Here was such utter stillness that the girl's breathing beside him was an actual relief. It was a silence utter enough to hear. He did hear it. Or was it simply his own blood pulsing in his ears, a formless throbbing, an infinitely faint rustling, a vague whispering? He frowned in the concentration of listening, and Patricia quivered against him. "There!" she hissed. "There!" He peered into the gray dimness. Nothing at all. Or was there something? A shadow? But what here could cause a shadow, here in this sunless region of fog? A condensation of mist, that was all. But it moved. Mist can't move without the thrust of wind, and here there was no wind. He strained his eyes in an effort to pierce the obscurity. He saw, or he imagined it, a vast looming figure, or a dozen figures. They were all around. One passed silently overhead, and numberless others weaved and swayed just beyond the range of vision. There were murmurings and susurrations, sounds like breathing and whispering, patters and rustles. The fog shapes were weirdly unstable, looming from little patches of darkness into towering shadows, dissipating and forming like figures of smoke. "Good Lord!" gasped Ham. "What can—" He tried to focus his gaze on one individual in the shadowy throng. It was difficult. They all seemed to shift, to merge, advance, recede, or simply materialize and fade out. But one surprising phenomena suddenly caught his attention, and for a moment stunned him into rigidity. He saw faces. Not exactly human faces. They were more such appearances as Patricia had described, the faces of gargoyles or devils, leering, grimacing, grinning in lunatic mirth, or seeming to weep in mockery of sorrow. One couldn't see them clearly enough for anything but fleeting impressions, so vague and instantaneous that they had the qualities of an illusion or dream. They must be illusions, he thought confusedly, if only because their conformation, though not human, imitated the human. It was beyond the bounds of reason to suppose that Uranus harbored a race of humans, or even human-like beings. Beside him, Patricia whimpered. "Let's go back, Ham. Please, let's go back." "Listen," he said, "those things are illusory, at least in part." "How do you know?" "Because they're anthropomorphic. There can't be any creatures here with nearly human faces. Our own minds are adding details that don't exist, just as every time you see a cloud or a crack on the ceiling, you try to make a face out of it. All we're seeing is denser spots in the mist." "I wish I thought you were sure of that," she quavered. He wasn't at all sure, but he reaffirmed it. "Of course I am. I'll tell you an easy way to prove it, too. We'll turn the infrared camera on them, and that'll bring out enough detail to judge by." "I'd be afraid to look at the plates," said the girl, shivering as she peered apprehensively at the vague horrors in the fog. Suppose they do show those faces. What will you say then?" "I'll say that it's a queer and unexpected coincidence that Uranian life, if they are forms of life, has developed along somewhat the same lines as terrestrial, at least in outward form." "And you'll be wrong," she murmured. "A thing like this is beyond coincidence." She trembled against him. "Do you know what I think? Ham, do you suppose it's possible that science has gone all wrong, and that Uranus is hell, and that those are the damned?" He laughed, but even his laugh sounded hollow, muffled by the smothering fog. "That's the maddest idea that even your wild imagination has ever produced, Pat. I tell you, they're—" A scream from the girl interrupted him. They had been standing huddled together, staring at divergent angles into the dome of mist, and he spun around now to gaze in the direction she faced. For a moment his vision was blinded by the shift, and he blinked frantically in an effort to focus his eyes. Then he saw what had startled her. It was a vast, dusky shadow that seemed to originate somewhere near the surface, but was springing upward and curving over them as if it actually climbed a veritable dome of mist, like a dim river of darkness flowing upward. Despite his derision of Patricia's fear-born imaginings, his nerves were taut. It was a purely automatic gesture that brought his weapon to his hand, and it was pure impulse that sent a bullet flaming into the mist. There was a curiously muffled report from the shot, a single full echo, and then utter silence. Utter silence. The rustles and murmurings were gone, and so were the fog shapes. Blinking into the mist, they saw only the sullen grayness of the eternal cloud itself, and they heard no sound but their own tense breathing and the faint after-ring of their eardrums from the concussion. "They're gone!" the girl gasped. "Sure, just what I said. Illusions." "Illusions don't run away from gunshots," retorted Patricia, her courage revived instantly with the vanishing of the fog shapes. "They're real. I'm not nearly as afraid of real things as of things I can't understand." "Do you understand these?" he rejoined. "And as for illusions not running away from gunshots, I say they might. Suppose these appearances were due to a sort of self-hypnosis, or even merely to the eye strain of staring through this fog. Don't you think a shot would startle us out of the proper mental state so that we'd no longer see them?" "Maybe," she said doubtfully. "Anyway, I'm not scared any more. Whatever they are, I guess they're harmless." She turned her attention to the puddle of mud before them, in which a few curious feathery growths swayed to the bubbling of the surface. "Cryptogamoid," she said, stooping over them. "Probably the only sort of plant that can exist on Uranus, since there's no sign of bees or other pollen carriers." Ham grunted, peering into the dismal gray mist. Suddenly both of them were startled into sudden alertness by the sound of the bell on the drum that held the guide wire. One ring, a warning from the Gia. Pat sprang erect. Ham tugged the wire in instant reply and muttered, "We'd better go back. Harbord and Cullen must have seen something. It's probably the same sort of thing we saw, but we'd better go back." They began to retrace their steps, 1,000 feet of wire humming softly as it wound back on the spring drum at Ham's waist. Other than that and the crunch of their steps on the gravel, there was silence, and the fog was merely a featureless dome of faintly greenish grayness. They had progressed perhaps 200 yards when it changed. Patricia saw the fog shapes first. "They're back!" she hissed in his ear, with no sound of fear in her voice now.